next year would see the publication of Enter If You Dare, Scary Tales from the Haunted Mansion, written by Nicholas Stevens and illustrated by Sergio Martinez. This is an anthology of short stories, and it seems like it's Disney trying to do their own version of Goosebumps or Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. The same team also published one based on Pirates of the Caribbean, which I did not buy and have not read because it's not relevant to this video, but, maybe someday if the people demand it. But for now, let's read this book, starting with the foreword.
Welcome, dear friend, to my humble homestead.
Well, I guess that's more polite than foolish mortals.
Sit right down, take a chair, and we'll see if you get to the end.
Look, my attention span's not what it used to be, but I think I can make it through 75 pages. Our first story is called The Fortune Teller. It centers on two boys, an arrogant kid named Joe Lambert and a scared kid named Luis Rodriguez, who lose their football in the Haunted Mansion graveyard, and they encounter a strange figure.
Allow me to introduce myself. I am Ezekiel. I work for Madame Blackheart, who just moved into the big house there.
Hey, this book gave Leota a last name. Neat. Leota Blackheart, psychic at law. I gotta get myself a Disney Plus pitch meeting.
Oh, Madame Blackheart doesn't just live there,
said Ezekiel.
She works there too. Madame is a seer, a fortune teller. Perhaps you boys would like to come inside and see what the future holds.
So Joe pressures Louise into entering the mansion and meeting with Leota, and Ezekiel takes them inside.
Just then, Ezekiel returned, smiling his ghastly smile.
Madame Blackheart, we'll see you now.
He led the boys into a cavernous parlor.
Your cavernous parlor betrays an aura of foreboding. Sorry, couldn't resist.
On the table sat a round object a little larger than a basketball. It was draped with black velvet.
I'll bet that's a crystal ball, right?
Joe asked Ezekiel. Ezekiel gazed at the covered object. There was something in his eyes, something wild and terrified.
It is the source of all of Madame's power,
he whispered.
Oh, okay, so it's gonna be a twist that her head is in the ball. Probably would be a more effective twist if we didn't know this was based on the Haunted Mansion, but hey. So a human woman shows up with her head covered in a veil, sits down and lifts the cloth and looks into the crystal ball.
I shall begin,
Madame Blackheart said. Murmuring and swaying, she peered at the round object beneath the black cloth.
One of you,
she said suddenly,
shall grow to be a man of wealth and prominence.
That would be yours truly, Joe said, elbowing Luis.
And the other?
Madame Blackheart's voice rose, becoming thin and shrill like an icy wind.
The other shall spend all of his days in an asylum for the hopelessly insane.
Man, Goofus and Gallant is way more intense than I remember. So even Joe's a bit creeped out by this, to the point that he leaves his football behind and wants to go back for it the next night.
That's my genuine autographed Joe Montana. I gotta get it back. My grandfather gave me that ball.
Maybe you should use a less cherished ball to play catch with, period, let alone next to a haunted mansion. So the kids sneak into the mansion, Joe gets his ball, but temptation overtakes him and he looks inside the crystal ball to see a woman's living head. Who could have seen this coming? Madame Blackheart's body shows up, takes off the veil, and reveals no head, just a bloody stump. In his fear, Joe knocks over the table, shatters the glass ball, and scrambles to leave with his football, but he accidentally grabs the lifeless woman's head instead. So, this Haunted Mansion book kills off Madame Leota for reals in the first chapter. Bold. Later, Louise passes the mansion and sees the freshly dug graves for both Madame Blackheart's body and her head with the new headstone. I'll give it this. I don't know how good a Haunted Mansion story it is, but it's a much better Twilight Zone episode than Tower of Terror. Chapter 2 is The Face in the Mirror, where Sarah Jane Way keeps seeing a scary ghost over her shoulder in her reflection, and keeps seeing her own reflection become deformed. She goes to the stable to ride her horse, and discovers a photo of the man who's been haunting her. It's Jake McKeith, who built the stable 100 years ago.
Yep, old Jake had a colorful life.
Miss Shea said.
Fought in the Civil War, then bought this place.
Which side did he fight on? Is this set in New Orleans Square or Liberty Square? It's a pretty important question.
He's buried in the cemetery in that old abandoned mansion beyond the riding trails. You know, the place over by Sedgwick Park.
I assume Sedgwick Park is what the locals call Tom Sawyer's Island.
Why is Jake buried there?
Sarah asked.
Story goes that he was in love with the widow of the mansion's original owner. I guess she's the one who had him buried there.
I like how we don't know if the widow was in love with him too. This could have been a pity bury. Anyway, Sarah goes riding, the horse gets spooked by a snake and runs wild. She sees Jake in a puddle reflection, but he's warning her, and she ducks just in time to not hit the branch that killed him 100 years ago. So it turns out Jake is an exceptionally helpful ghost. That's a more positive outcome than the first story. Next is Music to Their Ears, where Brandon Morell's older brothers try to bully him out of playing his clarinet, so he goes to play at the graveyard and he hears other musicians join in. He ends up playing a concert for skeletons, a skeleton dance if you will, and he's warned that he has to keep playing for the entire party or else he's doomed. There's no stopping. So clearly this is a warning against trying to make a career out of your artistic passion. You think it's gonna be fun, but then you just have to keep doing it forever. Speaking of warnings, next is The Eyes Have It, where one of those predatory modeling agencies seems to be being run out of the mansion as a vain teen girl gets her photo taken and it ends up stealing her soul, I think? Yeah, this one had even less to do with the mansion as we know it than the other stories. But the final story is Late for the Wedding, which is the second of these stories to actually use specific mansion iconography because it's a possible backstory for the Beating Heart Bride. Basically, a cranky old man died, his daughter died years ago, he had forbidden her from marrying her love as long as he was alive, but now that he's not, her boyfriend, now an old man, digs her up and marries her with her heart still beating in her chest. So, I think it's sweet and romantic in a creepy way, but it could also just be creepy in a creepy way. It could just be skeleton fetish porn. Look, when I said I had the attention span for 75 pages, I was expecting those pages to have a lot more to do with the Haunted Mansion. Yeah, I just gotta be honest. If it wasn't for the first and the last story, I would not think this book had anything to do with the Disney Haunted Mansion. You could republish the other stories under a different title and I would not make the connection. Sure, some of the elements are evocative of memorable mansion characters, a ghost in the mirror, graveyard musicians, pictures, but they all feel like classic ghost tropes that just happen to be used by both the ride and this book. But it is a decent tonal adaptation of the mansion, embracing spookiness and a little bit of silliness, and I can imagine that a young person might have an interest in horror awakened by this book the exact same way they'd have it awakened by the ride. If you like children's horror, it's worth a read, just don't expect that much mansion specificity from this book.
So hurry back, we would like your company.